Dead by Daylight is a game with hundreds of perks, with more being added constantly, and while some perks are completely forgettable or useless, and some are good fun or just fun to use in niche builds, there is occasionally one that is so amazing that it completely changes the game. However, there has never been a perk in Dead by Daylight as impactful as Dead Hard. There will more than likely never be a perk as game-changing and impactful as Dead Hard ever again. This perk was so strong that it genuinely changed the entire game, and became more of a gameplay element rather than just a perk you added to a loadout. This perk is so amazing that not only did it change the entire game itself, but it had lasting effects on the game even after it was reworked, basically traumatizing the players after it was fixed. But how was Dead Hard so strong that just a simple perk shifted the entire game balance just by passively existing? Let's start from the beginning. Dead Hard was introduced in the 5th chapter of Dead by Daylight, A Lullaby for the Dark, with it bringing David King and the Huntress along with their perks, bringing along the star of today's video, Dead Hard. In Dead Hard's original incarnation, it had a simple ability. While injured with the push of a button, you would dash forward and become totally intangible during its animation. So for about a second, you would instantly dash forward roughly 4 meters. Now, while it sounds incredibly simple on paper, let's break down why this was so game-changing basically instantly as soon as it was added to the game. This ability acts as a pseudo skill shot button, with you needing to be at least somewhat precise with it. Now see, I'm not against the idea of this perk, as it would reward players with good timing and reward amazing reads, and work sort of like a skill shot ability. Like a parry, aiming a shot, or activating an ability that only lasts about a second or so. Something like this in Dead Hard sort of fits into this ability. You need to time Dead Hard in order to dodge the killer's attack, right? A high risk, high reward perk. Well, about that. Again, in most games, usually these sorts of abilities have a sort of caveat to them, usually being something like if you mess up the parry or shot, you were put at a severe disadvantage state, like not being able to attack for a bit or being totally wide open to being punished. In Dead Hard's case, however, there is nothing of the sort. See, when Dead Hard's animation ends, the survivors keep running as if nothing happens. There's no limitation on being able to move or the survivor performing an animation after to recover, they can just keep going. This right here is one of the many reasons why this perk is so overpowered and literally game breaking. For a perk like this to exist, there should typically be a huge downside on fail too, since it is so strong, yet there is none. And before you say, oh well you have to become exhausted after you use it so you can't use it again. First off, in old Dead by Daylight, exhaust could charge while sprinting, meaning that you could perform multiple Dead Hards in one singular chase. Secondly, being exhausted isn't really a huge downside in chase that would impede you, as you can still run, vault, drop pallets, etc. all the same. It's not like the survivor becomes hindered after using it or anything of the sort. There's no actual punishment or risk to using it. Again, like other games with a skill shot button, it's high risk, high reward, while Dead Hard is extremely low risk and extremely high reward. Much like some other perks in Dead by Daylight. This is still only half of the issue. The real issue is the actual gameplay and perk itself. When it's activated, you would quickly bolt forward and again, totally intangible during the animation. You cannot be hit or collide with survivors or the killer. This means that you could bypass anything. You could Dead Hard through killer hits, killer powers, hell, even traps. That's right, you could dash over the bear trap and completely avoid it, meaning you could literally trap the trapper and shut down his entire game plan because you pushed a button. Then, since it gives you a free quick dash, this means that if the killer is right behind you and about to hit you, you could just press E and dash to the loop. And paired with how OP loops were back in the day, you could effectively teleport 6 meters in an instant. This perk basically broke the whole flow of the game, as typically, killers are supposed to, chase and lunge and use their power in a chase to actually catch up and down survivors, right? However, when someone was using Dead Hard, they could just push a button and get another chance to loop and get a free get out of jail free card. Survivors no longer needed to worry about not having enough distance to make it to the loop or being hit by a lunge right as they got to the pallet, since they could just Dead Hard and teleport to the loop for free. If there was a period of time after using the perk, like you couldn't vault or drop pallets, making it an actual rewarding skill shot button, that would make this perk way better and way more balanced. But since it basically just teleports you forward in an instant, you can use it to make everything safe. This perk made it incredibly hard for killers to use their power, or even loop correctly, as you could never lunge at survivors since Dead Hard existed. And killers with a long startup, or an obvious one like Hillbilly or Huntress, they would just, again, push E and you would waste your power. Back then, there was truly nothing killers could do, as exhaustion perks or add-ons didn't really exist. Perks like Fearmonger or Blood Echo didn't exist, so killers just had to eat one or, again, more per chase. Dead Hard was incredibly overpowered and game-breaking, so surely behavior would do something to fix this perk so that killers could lunge and properly play the game again, right? Right? Weeks turned into months, turned into years, and no changes whatsoever. It really felt like Dead Hard was here to stay, running into bully squads with teams of 4 running this perk and insta-blind flashlights with nothing killers could really do to counteract this. Killers couldn't even use their powers or loop properly, as if they wanted to lunge, it was such an obvious tell that survivors would have more than enough time to just Dead Hard and get out of the loop for free. There was practically nothing killers could do. However, July 19th, 2022, almost 5 years since this perk was introduced, it finally got a rework, the first change in years. Had the killer's prayers been answered after all this time? Has Dead Hard finally been laid to rest and killers can finally use their powers and lunge again? In a tragic event, Dead Hard was effectively the same, if not better, and this enraged the whole of DBD. This game-breaking perk that had a 70% pick rate had finally been reworked after 5 years of suffering, just for it to be basically the same, if not better. Patch 6.1.0 dropped, and along with many other changes, Dead Hard was reworked. Now it would no longer give you a dash of speed, but would instead give you 1 second of endurance, which was then reduced down to 0.5 seconds, and I'll basically be referring to it in this state instead of the 1 second state. This made it become more in line with a sort of parry ability. While this seems a lot better on paper as it fixes the issues of survivors being able to just dash through everything, this brought a whole new issue. Whenever a survivor is hit, this grants them a huge speed burst for a bit. See where I'm going with this? Instead of getting your small, tiny dash, survivors would now get a big speed boost. This meant that while the risk is higher, the reward you get is much stronger. This perk now functions more like a skill-based ability, and it became much harder to use. But with how Dead by Daylight is, this isn't really something hard to activate. Many killers have extremely obvious tells to them, like a grunt or seeing a giant red laser appear under you. Along with that, there were still many ways to guarantee the usage of this perk in a literal 50-50 win-win scenario. See, if you were in a loop, all you would have to do is hit your ability right before you got to your pallet or vault. If the killer lunged at you, then they would hit your Dead Hard and you would get a free huge big speed boost. This would let you get to another tile that could possibly be even stronger, or you could just keep looping at the same tile, and making them lose bloodlust since they hit you. Or, if the killer didn't swing at you, then you'd just be able to vault or drop the pallet and not get hit at all. See how it was still a problem? In most scenarios, it was a lose-lose situation, and even more so with killers who had an extremely obvious ability to counter, like Demogorgon, Huntress, Hillbilly, Pig, Mouse 1 killers, etc, etc. However, in the event that a killer somehow managed to catch up to a survivor and was right there within hitting distance, this would lead to what was known as a Dance of Death, where it essentially turns into a western. Both opponents have to wait for the other to make their move first, as if they act first, the other side would win. Should the killer swing or use their power, the survivor would just Dead Hard and win this interaction. However, if the survivor gets impatient or anxious and Dead Hards too early, they would just get hit, of course. See, while it does sound intense and awesome being in this stare down with the survivor, after the 80th time in a day, it just became incredibly boring and tedious. This is, a game where you're supposed to play as a killer, people with superpowers or having giant chainsaws, but instead, you have to be afraid of someone hitting a dab in front of you and being able to face tank through a literal chainsaw. And of course, during the Dance of Death, it's not like they would just be standing there staring at each other the whole time. No, the survivor would obviously be running towards their closest loop, meaning now that you're basically on a timer, where you have to make a decision of when to try and hit the survivor before they get to the loop and have to start the whole process all over again, basically. You see how this is still an issue even after the rework? This is also what led to killers becoming basically traumatized, due to how Dead Hard is so easy to use and eventually becoming a free perk for everyone to unlock. That meant that literally anyone and everyone can use it. Dead Hard had the highest pick rate in the game for 5 years, and because of that, killers just slowly learned to never try and lunge. Lunging was such an active and obvious animation that survivors would have ample time to react and be able to dodge and Dead Hard it. Because of that, it meant that basically any M1 killer couldn't afford to chase properly and lunge, unless they specifically knew that they had another exhaustion perk, like Lithe, Sprint Burst, Balance Landing, etc. But until they saw that other exhaustion perk, they just couldn't take the risk of lunging like crazy, because they would get punished hard for playing the game. Hell, even after the second nerf, which I'll get to later, it still took weeks for killers to remember, oh yeah, we can lunge again. So, this second version of Dead Hard is still arguably either as strong or stronger than the original version, depending on how you look at it. While the old one is safer and more reliable, the new one is riskier and gives a greater payoff should you land it. Somehow, Behavior completely missed the ball of what made Dead Hard so overpowered, and that was its insane, unmatched ability to make killers not able to use a core mechanic of the game, that being the lunge. My still number one suggested change after all this time is just to make it so that after survivors use this perk, they just couldn't act out of it. Make it have a lot of end lag, like whiffing a move in a fighting game. Instead, even if they fuck up using it, they can just drop a pallet and safely continue looping. Plus, this perk never even really made sense, as you could be hit with a literal chainsaw, a giant club, or be punched by a dude who can destroy entire buildings and just walk away just fine. Stitch that up, you'll be good as new. But what never really made sense to me is why you guys haven't hit that subscribe button. Like seriously, why don't you hit that subscribe button? You won't become exhausted after using it, and you don't need to be injured to hit the subscribe button either. Eventually though, after about 6 years, in the year 2023, Behavior finally had enough and hit Dead Hard with the nuclear option, finally laying this perk to rest after making the game suffer for all these years. Dead Hard now would only become usable after being unhooked, meaning that it was only usable a max 2 times per survivor. This one singular change, while strange, basically made looping overnight heal back to how it was supposed to be before this perk was ever introduced. Killers rejoiced as they gained the ability to lunge again, and all seemed well in the world. No longer would killers have to worry literally every single time in chase if survivors had the perk with, a 60 to 70% pick rate. They would now know when the perk was activated and could be an actual possibility in chase. Without it being, every time you wanted to lunge or use your power, they just hit you with Dead Hard and you lose the chase. So now, in conclusion, I don't really think there will ever be a perk again like Dead Hard in the game. The new perk Dramaturgy looks like it might act like old Dead Hard with the dash of speed you get in a straight line, but so far I don't think it will ever come close to Dead Hard since it doesn't make you intangible. And since it is an RNG fest, it could make you exposed too, so I'm not really too worried about it. This perk really was a once in a lifetime thing, where you could genuinely run into 4 of these in a single game, and it just made chasing feel so boring. As some killers, you would just have to eat the Dead Hard and continue the loop, even after losing all that momentum because the survivor pressed one singular button that defeats your entire power. Even after the rework, I still saw many killers hesitate to lunge because that's just, how bad it was. After not being able to lunge for 6 whole years, now suddenly overnight, boom, you can use your power and lunge again. It's just a total shock. It just genuinely is like, whoa, I can do this again now. And that's not really hyperbole. With a pick rate that high, you couldn't afford the risk of lunging in every chase until you specifically saw that they used an exhaustion perk already or knew that they were exposed through an add-on or perk. Because what's the point in lunging if, you hit them and boom, now they run away twice as fast while you're still recovering from the hit animation and they're at a completely new loop with a pallet, vault, etc., all that sort of stuff. It just completely broke looping in general as, couldn't do anything against it, unless that is, you specifically build around it. But then if you cater your build around one thing, everything else suffers. But that's just how the game is as a whole. I do sort of envy the new players who never had to deal with how busted survivors used to be in old Dead by Daylight because, dear God, they were a menace. But with that, I will call it here. I hope you all enjoyed the video and got reminded about how busted this perk was, or you learned something new. I am Donut Boy signing off. Take care of yourselves and have yourselves a damn good one. Peace.